What is going on? Here's the deal. We're going to go a mailbag heavy podcast. So if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. If you're listening to this, appreciate you. The way you get in that mailbag is very, very easy. You just fire into my direct messages. It's my name, at John Middlekauff, 2 Fs. A lot of people screwed up, even my girlfriend's mother. But don't blame them. It's been getting screwed up for a long time. John Middlekauff, 2 Fs. DMs wide open. Fire in those DMs. Get your question answered. Very, very easy to do. Like interacting with the people. And anything from the NFL, college football, life questions, business questions, anything flies. Obviously, we talk a lot of football here, but you hit me with anything you need. Life advice, you name it. Career advice, media, who cares? Just fire in those DMs. Get your question answered on the show. Very, very easy to do. Before we dive into the direct messages, here's what I need you to do. I need you to grab your iPad. I need you to grab your cell phone. And I need you to download a little app. And that app is known as Gametime. They're the official ticketing app of this podcast. It's the holiday season. You know the hardest thing to do during the holiday season? I got a big birthday coming up for someone who also lives in my house. And I go, what am I going to get her? It's very difficult. It's not easy to do. Well, if you're thinking about a brother, if you're thinking about a mother, if you're thinking about your son, if you're thinking about your daughter, here's what you do. You download Gametime, you buy a pair of tickets to a game, college or pro, to a concert, to a comedy show, any event. Go enjoy yourself and do it on me. Promo code John saves you $20. In these inflationary times, getting a present and saving money, you can't beat it. You won't beat it. So download that Gametime app, buy a pair of tickets, college football playoff, NFL playoffs, NBA games, college basketball games, concerts. See any one you want to see. And again, promo code John, $20 off. Save yourself some money. Been following the podcast YouTube content for a couple years now. Always love your stuff. When you brought up Kelce, a little bit of a decline from his prime years as a tight end, I don't get why people got so bad. And for those of you that don't know, it kind of went viral because the Daily Mail picked up a line that I gave Coward about that I think he's getting old. And listen, I'm a Kelce fan, but people were like saying I crushed him. I said, I think he's a little old. You know, he used to be an A+ player. Now he's like a B+. And every Chief, I don't even know what the podcast or YouTube show, everyone's picking it up. Jason Dunn, a guy that I always used to like as a player. I still do. I mean, he was the blocking tight end for Tony Gonzalez, was shitting on me, which, you know, it's just part of the deal playing in this lane. But people thought, I think Jason Kelce or Travis Kelce is not any good anymore, which is not true. Most athletes, especially in football, start declining in the mid-30s. So it just shouldn't be that shocking to folks. Just wanted to back you on that one. My question is, if it is your call, how would you go about rebuilding the New England Patriots? It's clearly an operation in need of restructuring, given how bad the football team has been. Feel free to speculate. Well, obviously the first order of business is to separate from the coach. It's just time. It just is. He's been there 25 years. It's over. And there's nothing wrong with that. Things end. The majority of things in life, right? The overwhelming majority percentage of people that like are happily married till their dying day is small. Most things come to an end. Hopefully that turns out to be me. Hopefully if you're listening, that turns out to be you. But most things, whether it's business, whether it's our personal relationships, just end. You know, obviously you want them to go on forever. That's just not reality. So this thing with Belichick is over. Then I think you need to ask yourself, because the Patriots have not had a general manager the entire time with Belichick. Scott Pioli was not the GM. Nick Caserio was not the GM. They had a lot of influence, but Bill picked the players. So if you're going to fire Bill, and even if you're going to elevate Gerard Mayo to be your next head coach, who is going to pick the players? Because the coach cannot. The coach obviously has a lot of influence, but he has to have a personnel guy that he can lean on. Pete Carroll leans on John Schneider. It's ultimately his call. He makes more money than John, but John's proven himself to, know what he's doing. So guess what? He listens to him. Andy Reid won 2 Super Bowls in the last 5 years. Brett Veach picks the players. Why? He trusts them. He knows it's too much energy to do. And it makes everyone's job easier if we all have a specific role. No different than as a player. They don't ask Patrick Mahomes to make tackles. And listen, Bill's gotten away with it for a long time because he had Tom Brady. You remove Tom Brady, we see most of his picks suck. He's a really good defensive coordinator, but he can't pick the players. And you need to figure out a GM. Now, I do think before you just elevate Gerard Mayo, are you sure that we don't need outside counsel? We don't need to start from scratch, right? And that would be the question that only Krafts can answer, because all indications show that they are going to hire Mayo. Now, I don't know. I don't know enough about him beside like as a player, and he obviously has been an assistant for Bill for a while, but it's a tough decision. I think the hardest part about the restructure is how you break up, because breakups are not easy. Breakups are easy if you talk to, been dating a girl for 2 months. It's like, whatever. I'm not that interested, right? This is not working out. Breakups are tough when you've been in a relationship with someone 25 years. Personally, professionally, it's going to get weird. There's pride, there's ego, there's sweat equity, there's time equity. It's just going to be very complicated. And to me, before we even get into who's next, how is this divorce going to happen? Is Bill going to go, fuck you, fire me? I'm not going to be here. Or is it going to be like a mutual breakup? Is it going to be like, Bill, would you like to go somewhere else? We'll trade you. To me, that's one of the most fascinating non-playoff stories of the entire NFL. How do the Krafts break up with Bill Belichick? How does Bill Belichick break up with the Krafts? I would say the Krafts are more likely to be cutthroat than Bill is. I just don't think Bill's going to tap out. I don't think Bill is going to be cool with like, yeah, I'm just retiring. Or just like, yeah, I'm cool with coaching somewhere else. And I think he is going to be cool with someone coaching somewhere else. But I think it's going to start with when Robert and Jonathan tell him he's no longer welcome as their head coach. Too old, too rich for it to be smooth. As anyone who's known any older person with some coin in the bank. And I'm not talking Belichick level coin. I'm just talking, hey, this guy made some millions, with his as a construction guy. Owned a construction company, and he's really successful, and he's worth $10 million. That guy is usually not open to ideas at 73 years old. You're talking Belichick, who's as accomplished as he's accomplished and been making, I don't know, $20, $25 million for the last decade. You think he's just going to be like, oh yeah, we'll just go our separate ways. This is not the way those humans are wired. I've been around a few, not with probably the money Bill is, making in terms of a salary, but very, very successful businessmen. It usually gets ugly at the end if they have to pivot and they just can't retire off in the sunset. And that's what coaches usually don't just tap out. No, definitely not someone like Bill. This is from Henry. John, just an observation I had from the pro Florida State crowd. I keep hearing this argument. Imagine if the NFL had a committee who decided playoff seeding, how unfair that would be. I think to equate an NFL record to a college football record and is asinine, and why strength of schedule matters so much. The worst teams in the NFL get to reload through the draft, and more importantly, there are 32 teams, not 120 plus. Just wanted your thoughts by comparison. Well, I think it's pretty simple, man. This year, the craziest part about this college football setup is that we never really had this happen over the years. There were 5 Power 5 conferences. There were 4 slots. In the NFL, for example, you don't need a committee because every division is represented. I've thought forever, if you're under 500 and you win your division, if there are 7 teams, or forever it was 6, now it's 7, with better records than you, not only do you not deserve a home playoff game, I wouldn't let you in the fucking playoffs. Why do you deserve a playoff seed just because your division sucks? In college football, we never rewarded that. If your conference was terrible and you weren't any good, you were irrelevant, right? If your division's good and you win it, you get the 1 or 2 seed, right? So the NFL rewards division winners and then obviously several wild cards. And like you said, it's not comparable. Everyone is picking from the same core of players, right? They are all equal partners. Everyone in the National Football League has enough money to fill out their salary cap. College football is not equal. Right now, ultimately, though, we're talking about Florida State, which is a traditional power, different from Alabama, Oregon, and Georgia. And I said it because a lot of people are going, well, how did Georgia go from 1 to 6? They didn't go from 1 to 6. The committee just put him there because they wanted to lessen the freak out. They believed in that room Georgia was better than Florida State, because you can't believe that Texas and Alabama were better and Georgia's not. Of course they did. That, to me, move was 100% about optics. And I've said over and over, I understand Florida State being mad. And I understand saying, our defense, we could have made hay, and maybe you would. It's why you play the games. Games aren't played on paper, right? Anyone who's ever gambled, anyone who's ever been a fan of a team, going, we can't lose this game, and then you lose. It's sports, right? Florida State, in theory, 100% could have won one of these games. You can't have a 17-point underdog when you have options for other teams that are equals. You just can't, fair or not. And I've said over and over, people get mad. Life's not fair. Like, I've been fired in life. Was it fair? No. Did it benefit me in the long run? 100%. This is going to sound like I'm an a-hole, but that moment for those guys inside will be the best thing that ever happened to them in life. Some of those guys will become very, very successful businessmen because of that moment. And all the stuff that they put into and still getting screwed over. Welcome to the real world. Welcome to the private sector. Welcome to America. Now, where I truly, truly believe, like, the ACC conference has been dead for a while. Florida State, Clemson, Miami, North Carolina, they've won it out. It's an irrelevant conference. I got news for you. The Big 12 kind of sucks too. And get ready moving forward. The Big 10 and the SEC are going to continue to dominate all these slots, and they should, right? So compared to the NFL has nothing in common with college football beside throwing a ball forward and trying to score touchdowns and get first downs. But the actual business around the sport, they're not even close to comparable. So listen, did Florida State, as a player coach, do I understand why they feel they got screwed? 1,000%. Am I glad? The best thing about football is they've always done what's best for us, the consumer. And that was a move for all of us that ultimately pay the bills. All this money comes from television. And, I saw Florida State might sue because they lost up to $8 to $10 million, the difference of going to the Orange Bowl and the difference of going to the BCS. While that sucks, the reason that money exists is because we consume it. And I'd much rather watch Alabama, Michigan, and so would every single other person not, biased toward Florida State. So it was a pro-consumer move. It was the right move from a competitive standpoint. And I'm glad they did it. I really am. And that's saying I'm a Florida State. I follow the program very closely. I'm not some Florida State hater, but you can't roll out your backup and third-string quarterback and expect us to take you seriously. Oh, Ohio State. Yeah, didn't they win the game like 60-20 with Cardell Jones back in the day? Like, I'm sorry, Louisville's pretty good. They just lost to Kentucky, who the entire fan base of Texas A&M wanted to throw a mutiny and burn down the program if they hired Kentucky's coach, who literally just beat that team. So it's not necessarily overreactions, because there is an argument. They went undefeated. Yeah, and a conference is terrible. In a god-awful conference. And their quarterback shattered his leg. So I just don't have any other way to say it by they did the right thing. I truly believe that. And we benefit the most. Those of us that watch, which is millions upon millions of people, that our time provides the money. Been listening to you since you were on Colin's feed. Comment: the last week's post show with Colin was your best. Seemed like you kind of been holding back, filtering during your conversations. Understandable, as he's the big boss. It was awesome to hear you getting fired up, swearing, pushing back on some of his takes. Keep it up. Question: I think I let it rip. It's hard sometimes on Zoom to, just, you got, they're not necessarily, there's a little, it's a quarter-second delay. The conversation, it is a little different than if I was just sitting there with him. But I never think I hold back. So I'm glad you enjoyed it. How many hours before a game do NFL players and coaches show up? Is it different for primetime games? I'd say the rule of thumb in major college football and the NFL, there's a thing called the pregame meal, which if you're a high school kid, you do the same thing. It's usually 4 hours before the game. If you're a road team, right, you eat it in the hotel. So there's a meal 4 hours before the game in the hotel. And then after the meal, about 30 minutes, there are rotating buses that take people to the game. So if I don't usually stadiums let fans in 2 hours before, but like when I worked for a team or was a media guy, I could get there way earlier. There are players on the field, give or take 3 hours before the game. if you get to an NFL stadium and kickoff is at 1:00 and you are on the field at 10 to 10:15, there are guys starting to kind of do their warm up. So usually they eat an hour before and then they get to the game. And then assistant coaches kind of come out. Some assistant coaches get there and work out, run the stadium. Usually don't see the head coach until the entire team comes out in pads. And when I say 3 hours before the game, these guys are in shorts and t-shirts, right? Playing catch, stretching, just doing kind of their individual. It's not like as a group. Sometimes there are two guys that work out together. Sometimes like, when I used to do a lot of Raiders pre and post game stuff, you get there and like the star quarterback for the other team would be out there playing catch with maybe the assistant quarterback coach, sometimes the backup quarterback. It's a pretty loose environment. You can bullshit with the coaches and the players. It's a great time. When I had a radio show, you get pretty good information, whether you know a coach or you just kind of introduce yourself with assistants. It's pretty relaxed. I wouldn't compare it. The most relaxed thing in all of sports is batting practice in baseball, in Major League Baseball. You can talk to anybody at any time. It's pretty cool. Football is not really like that beside 2.5 hours before a game. Very, very loose time. Now, some players are, I don't know if you'd like pick James Harrison's brain in that moment, but a lot of guys, it's kind of the calm before the storm. And then once they come back out with pads on, it's kind of on with Donkey Kong as they come out as a unit. So, interesting question. Can you believe we're this deep into the NFL season? We got to make every second count. With Draftking Sportsbook, you can make the most out of every game. Bet on your favorite teams for a shot at winning big bucks. New customers can score $150 instantly in bonus bets for betting $5 on any matchup. So right now, get in on the action with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Download the app now and use the code JOHN. New customers can score $150 instantly in bonus bets for betting just $5 on the NFL. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code JOHN. The crown is yours. Heard you bring up an interesting point about Ben Johnson leaving and Detroit needing to get the right offensive coordinator. Just to keep an eye out for Dan taking over play calling duties. He did it in the final 3 games 2 years ago with a lot of success. Sneaky smart offensive play caller despite the meathead allegations. I agree. Dan Campbell's not a meathead. There's a difference between being a meathead and a football guy. Part of being a football guy, if you're a former player, is having some meathead characteristics, right? Got to eat a lot, don't sleep much, and lift a lot. Vrabel, Dan Campbell have that. Doesn't mean intellectually you're not curious, you don't have a high capacity for knowledge relative to football. But let's be real. If they lose Ben Johnson, it is a question mark if it's a downgrade. Whether Campbell takes over, whether they hire someone else, it is a major wild card. I don't remember. I would imagine they were pretty bad. Didn't they fire not D'Anton Lynn? That's Anthony Lynn's son, Anthony Lynn, and then he elevated himself. I do think it's risky. Now I do think it's a good thing that he can do it, right? If you feel good about it. Now time would tell. Here's the other thing. There are expectations with this team. So they're going to make the playoffs this year. They're going to win the division, and they're going to host a playoff team. And let's say they win a playoff game, and then they lose to the Cowboys, Eagles, or 49ers. You would say the Detroit Lions had their most successful season since 1991. If they win a playoff game, this is their most successful season in over 30 years. That's incredible. Like Dan Campbell should get a massive contract extension. But next year, if Ben Johnson leaves, expectations come. And there were expectations this year, and they lived up to it, and they've been good. But next year, losing the offensive coordinator kind of puts him under the microscope if that's what he chooses to do. For example, Sirianni is pretty good at just, basically removing himself from that situation. He sucked at it, gave it to Shane Steichen, who's good at it. This year, they hired an offensive coordinator who was already on the staff, but still. So when the offense sucks, it's not really his fault. It's like, well, we got to figure out Brian Johnson. We got to get on the same page. The moment you name yourself as the offensive coordinator, you better produce, right? We talk about guys like Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, LaFleur, Sean Payton, Andy, whoever is also the head coach who's calling the plays. There's like an extra level of criticism, especially when you're a playoff level team. See it with Brandon Staley. what's the number one question he gets asked? Are you going to keep calling the defense? If he wasn't calling the defense, the question he'd be asking, like, are you going to fire your defensive coordinator? So when there's like a buffer between you and the responsibility, even though ultimately it's your responsibility because you're the head coach. So it's going to be fascinating. I don't remember that. I mean, I remember him calling plays in terms of like the headline. I don't really remember watching the Detroit Lions that much when they were terrible. Okay, Trent, why in the world is Oregon playing Liberty in a bowl game? Why wouldn't they get a bowl game versus Florida State or LSU? Their third strings are going to be throttling them by the midway through the second quarter. Thoughts? Because one of the rules right now, and this is what the 12-team playoff is going to eliminate, is the highest ranked non-Power 5 team. So early in the season when Fresno State was like 4-0, it's like, we're going to the Fiesta Bowl. The number one ranked non-Power 5 team, which would include Liberty, the Boise States, San Diego States, Fresno States, like that level of team. Appalachian State gets to go to a New Year's Day 6 bowl, and specifically the Fiesta Bowl. Well, all these bowl games have ties with conferences. So if you are the number 2 team in the Pac-12, right, it might even be the Pac-12 champion, but if the Pac-12 champion goes to the playoff, it's the next. And obviously Washington's going to the playoff, so it gets Oregon. Now, I think Liberty might be pretty good. I'd be lying if I've watched them play. As someone who's gambled for many, many years on bowl games, I would be very careful about saying stuff like that. Because for Oregon, when you lose, like, why I'd give Florida State a chance. One, it's pretty devastating that they lost. But if I'm Mike Norvell, the thing I'd be saying, we go fucking beat Georgia. We put it on them. We, win that game 20-10. We're going to look at the committee and say, you screwed up, and we're going to claim we're the national champions. That to me would be my message for the next 30 days. Well, if you're Georgia, it's like you just back-to-back national championships. You just lost to Alabama. I have a hard time thinking their players are going to take this game that seriously. I actually like Florida State plus whatever in that game. 1,000%. Oregon, their game plan was beat Washington and go to the playoffs. That was what they were thinking. All the way up till when the game ended and everyone's in tears. Why? They realize they're not in the playoffs. Now they go to the Fiesta Bowl, which in theory is a good bowl game. But if you're one of the players on Oregon, one of the coaches, you're like, that sucks. We had planned on going to play Texas or Michigan. Now we're playing Liberty. I haven't even looked at that line yet. Got news for you. Kind of like Liberty. Really do. Especially if it's like double digits, I think that's a pretty good bet. Not going to lie. Longtime listener. Back in the days when your shows were only on Colin's feed. Long time ago. Even though I don't think that ever was the case. We always had our own feed, but I hear you. I'm currently stationed in Japan and don't get to stay up to date with as much sports talk due to being deployed for more than half the year. So if this has been discussed already, but my question is regarding Kellen Moore. Well, we appreciate your service. For years, there seemed to be a lot of support for Kellen to become a head coach because some thought he was an offensive genius and for the work he had done with Dak. It even seemed like Jerry kept him on the staff after McCarthy hired him as a backup plan if it didn't pan out. Now that he's with the Chargers, is it ironic that Dak is having arguably the best season of his career without Kellen, and Justin Herbert has seemed to flatten out this season in his first season with him? I wouldn't necessarily say Herbert has regressed, and many still consider him a top 5 quarterback, but it seems like he's just off. Would love to hear your take on this. I've always said this about Kellen Moore. I'm biased, and there is a group of coaches I'm just biased toward, and they all kind of stem from the West Coast. And I worked at Fresno State, so we played Boise State. I think Chris Peterson is easily one of the best coaches of his generation. And no different than like Chris Peterson was created by working for Jeff Tedford. Jeff Tedford, who originally hired Chris Peterson at Oregon, who went to Boise State, hired Jonathan Smith. Jonathan Smith, who, was one of the coaches there when Kellen Moore was there. All these guys are interconnected, and I think they're all sweet. I think they're all badasses. I think Kalen DuBois is a good example, who worked for Jeff Tedford. All these guys have the combination: Tedford, Chris Peterson, Jonathan Smith, Kalen DuBois, intellectual toughness. They are smart guys. but their ethos as a football coach is a tough guy. That's Andy Reid. He loves passing the ball, but he's a former offensive lineman, loves blue chip defensive players, loves physical offensive linemen, right? Kyle Shanahan, offensive mind, loves defensive players. Sean McVay, same thing. I want my offensive coach to have a defensive identity. And when I watch Kellen Moore, who I've always rooted for because I saw him play in college, I thought he's one of the best college players I've ever seen. He was fucking remarkable. He was dominant. I do think when you watch his team play, he's got a little more like Lincoln Riley, Mike Leach than he does the tough guy element that those guys that I listed have. And listen, part of Chris Peterson's DNA when he was at Boise and then when he went to Washington, loved trick plays. Like Kellen Moore the other day, might have been 2 weeks ago, the Chargers ran that like downfield double pass, which is awesome. That's something Chris Peterson would do. And I'm all for trick plays because as the monotony of the season goes, adding a trick play just puts life into a practice, puts life into a meeting room. But I do think there's a fine line. And I think Kellen Moore, one thing I've seen this year, there's more of a softness to the way that he philosophically believes in football than maybe I had wished for. And listen, McCarthy's resume speaks for itself. We can nitpick him all we want. Sometimes his teams are definitely a little loosey-goosey down the stretch. He's a good football coach. He really is. We've seen him do it with Aaron Rodgers, and we're seeing him do it again with Dak Prescott. His teams win. Now, can they win the whole thing? I mean, I know he won one a long time ago, but it's right in front of them. They could beat the Eagles on Sunday and be in position, right, to get that rematch with the 49ers after getting their ass kicked and losing streaks multiple years in a row in the playoffs. But I don't know what to say. I would say Kellen Moore's, when I say reputation, I mean as a coach and like the stock of him as a coach. Like, for example, UCLA. There was this 5-star Deontay Moore. I think I'm saying his name right. Last name Moore. 5-star quarterback who was supposed to go to Oregon. UCLA, I think, paid him a bunch of NIL money, and he came to UCLA. So one of the biggest recruits they've gotten in a long time. Well, he was terrible this season. And I saw it either today or yesterday. He entered the transfer portal. Well, his stock was super high last year. Oregon wanted him. Probably a ton of teams in the country would have taken him. UCLA got him. Then he actually played. You're like, what is going on? Like part of Kellen Moore the last couple of years, like, I think he's pretty good. But it's like McCarthy's an offensive guy too. So the influence he's having. I'm not acting like Kellen Moore's a village idiot now, and he's not a good coach. But I definitely don't quite look at his star the same. I would say it's dimmed a little bit. And I was always someone, I would say, that supported him in the general conversation. Because when you're in that position with the Dallas Cowboys, biggest brand in the league, it's a polarizing conversation. Okay, it's time for this week's player I thought might give almost anything to redo his game. Brought to you by Uber Eats. You know the best part about being a backup quarterback is if they really like you and you just get in with a team that has a really good starting quarterback, you never have to play. It's like you just keep your job. They like you. You get to make 7 figures, get to be on an NFL team, get to throw the ball in practice, get to stay in shape. If you're single, you got a lot of options when you go out at night. Like, life's good. But the moment as a backup that you got to play, you can get exposed. Look at Jake Browning. Jake Browning, ideally, just be Joe Burrow's backup for as long as he can, never have to play. Got a chance to play. Played pretty good. Josh Dobbs got to play too much. It's like, we need to rein it back in. Tim Boyle, who somehow has been in the NFL, and unless you watch preseason, you never see the guy play because the Jets are such a debacle, and it's like mandated by Rodgers and his people that they have to have former Packers on the team at every single position. It's like, this Zach Wilson thing's not really working out. Let's bring in Tim Boyle. Then he throws a Hail Mary, doesn't even get it to the end zone, which leads to a pick 6. And the overall Tim Boyle experience was just pretty embarrassing. And if I was Woody Johnson, because you could be like, well, owners, because I'm a big believer in this, like owners can't meddle in football. Hire people and let them cook. When the team's being really shitty and I stop having faith in you as an owner or GM, like, I'm sorry, I'm going to get involved. We're paying Zach Wilson $9 to $10 million, and we're starting Tim Boyle, a guy that can't even throw the ball to the fucking end zone from the 50-yard line. I'm sorry, I'm not going to watch this anymore. Play Zach until the season ends. And that's what I would imagine happened. But Tim Boyle is a good example of, if I force you to play, it can be really ugly. Like Joe Flacco shows back up, throws a couple touchdowns. Like, oh, Joe Flacco, he's not that bad. The guy won a Super Bowl. Tim Boyle, I'm sorry. If it wasn't for Aaron Rodgers, probably wouldn't be in the NFL. Doesn't mean he didn't very accomplished athlete, but I think your time is over. That was this week's Almost Anything Player of the Week. And you can order almost anything with Uber Eats, the official on-demand partner of the NFL. Order now.